It was a quiet evening in the small town of Willowbrook. The sun was setting, casting an orange glow across the streets. The cool breeze rustled the leaves on the trees as people went about their business, unaware of what was about to happen. Zara, a young black woman, walked slowly down the sidewalk, making her way home from the grocery store. She wore dark sunglasses to shield her eyes from the bright light, and her cane tapped the pavement with a steady rhythm. Zara was different from most people in town. She had a disability that slowed her down, but she never let it stop her. Zara had once been full of energy, running races and climbing trees as a child. But an accident had changed her life forever. Now, every step was a struggle, but she always kept moving forward, never allowing herself to feel sorry for what had happened. She was strong, both in body and spirit, and had learned to live independently. Over time, Zara had built a quiet life, far away from the troubles of the world. The people in her town saw her as just another face in the crowd, a disabled woman who kept to herself. But they had no idea who she truly was. Zara was far more than they realized. As she continued her walk, Zara didn't notice the group of young men watching her from across the street. They were a gang, known for causing trouble in the area. They had been looking for someone to pick on, and Zara seemed like an easy target. To them, she was just another disabled woman, someone they could push around without much trouble. One of the men, the leader of the group, pointed toward Zara and said something to his friends. They all snickered and began to cross the street, their steps growing louder. Zara's senses, usually sharp, didn't pick up on the danger right away. She was lost in thought, thinking about the meal she had just bought and how she would enjoy it at home. Before she could react, the group surrounded her. The leader, a tall man with a rough face, stepped forward with a smirk. "Hey there, sweetheart," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. "You lost or something?" Zara paused, her heart rate picking up as she realized what was happening. She knew the signs of trouble when she saw them, but she didn't let fear take control. Instead, she stood tall and straightened her back, trying not to let her cane shake in her hands. The leader continued, his words meant to taunt her. "What's wrong? Can't even walk properly? Maybe you should be careful who you run into around here. Not everyone is as nice as we are." The rest of the gang laughed, their voices full of malice. They thought Zara was easy prey. They had no idea that they were about to make a serious mistake. Zara didn't respond to their insults. She had learned long ago that the best way to handle bullies was to stay calm and avoid giving them the satisfaction of a reaction. She kept walking, her pace slow but steady, trying to make her way past them. But the gang wasn't going to let her go so easily. The leader reached out and grabbed her arm, pulling her back. "Where do you think you're going now? You don't get to just walk away from us." Zara froze, feeling the grip on her arm. She didn't flinch, didn't panic. Instead, she took a deep breath, her mind working quickly. She knew she had to stay calm. There were only a few things in this world that could catch her off guard, and these men weren't one of them. Without a word, Zara turned her head slightly and looked directly at the leader. Her expression remained neutral, but there was a glimmer of something else in her eyes, a quiet strength that none of the gang members expected. The leader met her gaze, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. The gang members, still standing in front of Zara, began to grow more confident. They had thought she was just another disabled woman, someone they could push around without any trouble. They didn't know anything about her past or the strength hidden beneath her calm, composed exterior. All they saw was a woman who walked with a cane, a woman they believed was an easy target for their taunts and bullying. The leader, still holding onto Zara's arm, grinned at his friends. "What's wrong, lady? Can't walk straight? You should really be careful in this part of town. Not everyone's so friendly," he sneered. His friends laughed, egging him on, but Zara remained silent. She had learned long ago that people like this only wanted attention. They wanted to feel powerful by putting others down. Zara wasn't interested in giving them that power. She wasn't afraid, and she wasn't about to let them get under her skin. She could feel their eyes on her, the way they sized her up as if she were an easy mark. The gang didn't know that Zara had faced far more dangerous situations in her past. She had been in far more intense confrontations with enemies who were far more skilled and ruthless than these men. This wasn't the first time someone had underestimated her, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. Zara took a deep breath, her mind already calculating. She was in control, even if the gang didn't realize it yet. Her heart rate stayed steady, her breathing calm. In a way, the situation felt almost familiar. She had been in tight spots before. Ambushes, battles, confrontations, but none of that mattered now. The only thing that mattered was getting through this without letting these men take away her peace. The leader leaned in closer, his face full of arrogance. "You don't belong here, lady. Maybe it's time you learned your place." Zara had heard worse, had faced much worse. But she didn't need to fight back with words. Her silence was her strength. She stayed still, calculating her next move, her sharp mind working through every possibility. The leader was close, and his friends were distracted by their laughter. They weren't paying attention to her hands or the way she was shifting her body, preparing herself. Without warning, Zara used the leader's grip on her arm against him. She twisted her body and stepped back quickly, causing him to lose his balance. In a smooth, practiced motion, she spun around, using her cane to gently but firmly push him to the ground. The gang members froze, their eyes wide with shock. They hadn't expected this from a woman they had judged as weak and harmless. Zara didn't waste any time. She had already shifted into defensive mode, ready to act if the gang made any sudden moves. Her calm expression never faltered. In fact, it seemed like she was almost waiting for them to react, knowing they would soon realize their mistake. The leader scrambled to his feet, his face red with embarrassment. What the hell was that? He shouted, furious that he had been thrown off balance so easily by someone he had underestimated. The gang members looked at each other, unsure of what to do next. They had expected Zara to be an easy target, someone who would cower in fear. Instead, they were facing someone who was not only unafraid, but also more than capable of defending herself. One of the gang members, a tall man with a scar across his face, took a step forward, his fists clenched. "You made a big mistake, lady," he snarled, looking ready to attack. Zara didn't move. She stood still, her posture relaxed, but her eyes sharp. She was waiting for them to make the first move. She didn't need to act aggressively. She knew that if they came at her, she could handle them easily. The gang had no idea that they were dealing with someone far more dangerous than they could have imagined. For a moment, everything seemed to stand still. The gang members were unsure of how to proceed. They had expected fear, but instead, they were faced with a woman who was calm, composed, and in control. Zara's silent confidence sent a message they weren't ready to hear. She was no easy target, and she wasn't about to let anyone take advantage of her. The tension in the air grew thick as the gang members hesitated. They had misjudged her, and now they were starting to realize their mistake. Zara waited, knowing that soon enough, they would understand just how wrong they were. The gang members stood frozen, unsure of how to react. The leader, still trying to regain his composure after Zara's surprising move, glared at her. His pride was bruised, and he could feel the weight of his mistake. He had thought that picking on a disabled woman would be easy, an opportunity to show off to his friends. But now, in the face of her calm confidence, he realized he had made a serious misjudgment. Zara stood there, steady and unwavering. Her cane rested lightly in her hand, almost as if it were an extension of her. Her posture was relaxed, but there was a quiet strength about her that sent a clear message to the gang. She was not someone to be trifled with. The leader, trying to save face in front of his friends, took a step forward. His voice was low but filled with anger. "You're gonna regret that, lady. You don't know who you're dealing with." Zara didn't flinch. She simply tilted her head slightly, her eyes locked on him. The gang members behind the leader exchanged nervous glances, but none of them made a move. Zara wasn't afraid, and they could feel it. She didn't have to say a word. Her calm demeanor spoke volumes. The leader took another step, this time raising his hand as if to strike. But before he could even get close, Zara acted. Her body moved with the precision and speed of someone who had spent years training for moments like this. In one fluid motion, she shifted her weight and used her cane to block his arm, redirecting his force. At the same time, she pivoted, bringing her other hand up to gently but firmly guide him off balance. The leader stumbled back, completely caught off guard. His face turned red with frustration. "What are you, some kind of freak?" he yelled, now genuinely scared. Zara remained silent, her gaze still steady. She didn't need to respond. The gang had underestimated her from the start, and now they were realizing the truth. She wasn't just a disabled woman. She was a force to be reckoned with. The gang members, who had once laughed and mocked Zara, now stood still, watching the scene unfold. They had no idea what to do. The leader, frustrated and humiliated, looked around at his friends for support. But they were all hesitant, uncertain of how to proceed. They had expected an easy victory, but instead, they were facing someone who knew exactly how to handle herself. Zara's calm presence only added to the tension. The gang members, still unsure of what to do, exchanged nervous glances. They had expected a victim, someone they could overpower easily. But Zara wasn't playing their game. She was in control now. The leader, unable to accept defeat, tried again. This time, he lunged at her, hoping to catch her off guard. But Zara was ready. With a quick twist of her body, she sidestepped his attack and used his momentum against him, sending him stumbling into a nearby trash can. The sound of metal crashing against concrete echoed through the street, and for a moment, everything went quiet. The gang leader lay on the ground, stunned by the sudden turn of events. His pride had been shattered, and his confidence was gone. Zara stood over him, her face calm, but her eyes sharp. She had proven her point. She didn't need to fight. She had shown them that underestimating her was a mistake they would never make again. The other gang members, now realizing the gravity of their error, started to back away. They had no idea who this woman was, but they knew they didn't want to find out. Zara's silence and confidence had completely shifted the power in the situation. She had gone from being the target to the one in control. As the leader slowly got to his feet, his friends stepped back, their faces pale and unsure. Zara didn't move. She didn't need to. She had already won. As Zara stood in the middle of the street, her thoughts were calm, almost peaceful. The gang had retreated, their arrogance now replaced with fear. They had underestimated her, but Zara had no intention of chasing them down or making a scene. She simply adjusted her cane and started walking again, as if nothing had happened. But as she walked, her mind began to wander back to her past, to the days when she had been part of something much larger, something far more dangerous. Those days seemed like a distant memory now, buried under layers of time and effort to move forward. Zara had tried hard to leave them behind, but sometimes, moments like this one, when she was forced to confront danger, reminded her of who she really was. Her training had been intense, and it had shaped her into someone who was capable of much more than people ever realized. She had spent years in special forces, where every moment was filled with life or death decisions. It had been a world of precision, discipline, and strength, and Zara had thrived in it. She had learned how to survive in the harshest conditions, how to think quickly in moments of danger, and how to use her surroundings to her advantage. In those days, Zara had been known for her ability to stay calm in the most stressful situations. Her team had trusted her instincts and had relied on her ability to think under pressure. She had been an expert in hand-to-hand combat, a master of strategy, and a skilled marksman. Her skills had saved lives on more than one occasion, and she had been proud of her work. But it wasn't just the physical training that had shaped her. Zara had learned how to read people, how to understand their motivations and fears, and how to use that knowledge to her advantage. She could tell when someone was bluffing, when they were nervous, or when they were ready to strike. It was a skill that had served her well, and one she had used that day when she faced the gang. As she walked through the quiet streets, Zora couldn't help but smile slightly at the thought. The gang had no idea who they had tried to mess with. They had thought they could intimidate her, but all she had needed to do was tap into the calm and focused mindset she had honed over the years. She hadn't needed to fight. She had simply let her training take over, guiding her every move. The peace of her current life had given Zara a sense of calm she hadn't known during her military days. But there were times when her old instincts kicked in, like when the gang had threatened her. Zara had been forced to tap into that side of herself again, to face danger head-on, and it had felt oddly familiar. As much as Zara had wanted to leave her past behind, it was still there, a part of her. It had made her who she was today. A woman who had faced much greater threats than the one she had just encountered, yet who still found peace in the simplicity of life. She didn't need to prove herself to anyone. Her past was her own, and it had shaped her into someone strong and resilient, someone capable of defending herself when necessary. Zara's cane tapped softly against the pavement as she made her way home, her thoughts drifting back to her time in the Special Forces. It had been a life of constant movement, of constantly being on alert. She had lived in places most people only dreamed of visiting, seen things most would never imagine. And while she was proud of the work she had done, she was also relieved to be away from it. The past, for all its intensity, had taught her one important thing. That strength wasn't just about physical power. It was about knowing when to fight and when to walk away. It was about using your mind, your training, and your instincts to navigate the challenges life threw at you. And that was exactly what Zara had done that day. As she approached her house, Zara felt a sense of satisfaction. She had handled the situation with grace and control, just as she always did. The gang might have thought they had picked the wrong person to mess with, but in truth, they had never stood a chance. Zara had always known that her past could come back to her at any moment, and today it had. But she was ready. As Zara approached her home, the peaceful rhythm of her walk was disrupted by the sound of footsteps behind her. Her senses, sharp as always, picked up the faint noise of movement. Too deliberate to be a coincidence, she didn't need to turn around to know that the gang hadn't given up. Despite their retreat moments ago, it seemed they had made a decision. They weren't going to let this go. Zara stopped for a moment, her mind already working. She didn't panic. She never did. The years of training had taught her how to think quickly and act even faster. She was no longer just a woman with a cane. She was someone who had faced far greater threats. She knew what was coming, and she knew exactly how to handle it. The gang had regrouped. They must have realized that they had made a mistake by walking away. And now, they were returning to finish what they had started. Zara wasn't afraid of them. The truth was, she had already proven that they were no match for her. But what worried her was how they might act now, when their pride was on the line. She couldn't afford to underestimate them again. She turned to face the approaching footsteps. The leader and a few of his friends had returned, their faces filled with anger and frustration. Zara stood tall, her back straight, her cane in her hand. She was ready. She didn't need to say a word. She could tell by their expressions that they were looking for a fight, desperate to regain their lost confidence. The question was, how far would they go? Back for more, huh? Zara said calmly, her voice steady and clear. What is it you think you'll achieve this time? The leader snarled. You think you can just embarrass us and walk away? We're not done with you yet. Zara didn't move, standing her ground. I didn't embarrass anyone. You did that to yourselves. The leader's frustration was evident. He had thought Zara would be easy to push around, but she had made him look foolish. His pride, bruised from their last encounter, was clouding his judgment now. He gestured for his friends to move closer, signaling that they were ready to take things to the next level. But Zara's calm demeanor never wavered. She knew she didn't need to fight them. They had already lost. One of the gang members, a taller man with a cruel smirk, stepped forward. "You don't know who we are, do you? We don't let anyone get away with making us look stupid." Zora's eyes narrowed, but she didn't flinch. She could see the fear in their eyes, hidden behind the anger. They were acting tough, but their confidence had been shattered. They had no idea what kind of person they were dealing with. "If you think coming back here is going to change anything, you're wrong," Zora said, her voice as calm as ever. "I'm not looking for trouble, but I won't run from it either." The leader, growing more agitated, rushed toward her, his hands raised as if to grab her again. But this time, Zora was ready. She stepped aside with fluid grace, using her cane to gently nudge him off balance. He stumbled, falling to the ground in a heap. It wasn't the hardest fall, but it was enough to remind him who was in control. The other gang members stood still for a moment, shocked by how easily their leader had been knocked down. Zara didn't give them the chance to recover. With a swift move, she turned and faced the next man who tried to approach her. She used her cane once more, tapping it lightly against his chest, guiding him backward. His feet shuffled, and before he could react, he was off balance, stumbling back. They hadn't expected this. They hadn't expected someone like Zara. All their bravado, all their confidence was quickly disappearing as Zara remained calm, unshaken. Her movements were quick, calculated, and graceful, each one showing the years of training she had gone through. These gang members weren't soldiers. They weren't prepared for someone who could read their moves before they even made them. The leader, now struggling to get up from the ground, called out to his friends, "Don't just stand there. Get her." But his friends hesitated, unsure of what to do. They had seen enough. Zara was no longer a target. She was the one in control. "I don't want to hurt anyone," Zara said, her voice steady and unwavering. "But if you keep pushing me, you'll regret it." As Zara watched the gang walk away, she felt a small sense of relief. It wasn't just the fact that she had defended herself. What gave her peace was knowing that she hadn't needed to use force. The encounter had ended with only a few words, and the gang had retreated. Zara had shown them who was in control, but now, the quiet street felt like the calm after a storm. Zara took a deep breath, adjusting her cane once more. She had hoped this would be the end of it, but she knew it wasn't over. The tension in the air still lingered, and part of her wondered if the gang would return with more people next time. It was possible they would come back, angry and ready to cause more trouble. But for now, it was just Zara and the peaceful evening sky. As she continued her walk home, her thoughts began to shift. She knew she couldn't stay hidden in her past forever. The gang had seen a glimpse of her strength, but there were still parts of her life they didn't understand. What they didn't know, what no one knew, was that Zora was not just a woman walking with a cane. She was someone who had walked away from a life full of danger and violence to live a quiet life. A life she thought would remain peaceful forever. But now things were changing. As Zara rounded the corner of her street, she noticed something that made her pause. A few people were standing at the end of the block, talking in hushed tones. At first, she thought nothing of it. But then she saw a familiar face. It was one of the local police officers, Officer Harris, someone Zara had known from her time volunteering at the community center. He seemed to be speaking with another man, someone Zara didn't recognize. Her curiosity got the better of her, and she walked slowly toward the group. As she got closer, she overheard parts of their conversation. "I'm telling you, this is the person," the stranger said, his voice sharp. "She was involved in the incident at the park last year, the one with the gang. We need to track her down." Zara's heart skipped a beat. She knew what he was talking about. The incident at the park had been a dangerous confrontation, one that had made local news. A few gang members had been arrested, but the details had been kept quiet. Zara had heard whispers of it from some of the people in town, but she had tried not to get involved. Officer Harris spoke up, his tone more measured. "Are you sure it's her? She's just a quiet woman who keeps to herself. Why would she be involved in something like that? Zara froze, realizing they were talking about her. The stranger didn't seem to care about the doubts in Harris's voice. I've seen her around before. I know what she's capable of. She's not just some innocent woman. I've seen the way she moves, the way she handled herself back there. She's one of them, one of those soldiers. Zara's mind raced. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. The conversation felt like a puzzle she couldn't quite piece together. The stranger seemed certain of something, but Officer Harris wasn't so sure. He was still questioning the claims, but the doubts in his voice were starting to fade. Zara's heart pounded as the pieces fell into place. The stranger was talking about her military past, the one she had tried so hard to leave behind. The incident at the park, the way she had handled the gang members earlier, everything was coming to light. It wasn't just about the gang anymore. There was something bigger at play here. Feeling the weight of the situation, Zara took a step back, trying to avoid being noticed. She wasn't ready to confront anyone about her past. Not yet. Not like this. She turned slowly and made her way down the street, her thoughts a whirlwind. Zara had always known that her past could come back to haunt her, but she hadn't expected it to happen so soon. The gang was one thing, but now, it seemed like her old life was catching up with her faster than she could handle. As she neared her front door, Zara's mind was a mess of conflicting thoughts. On one hand, she was proud of the woman she had become, strong, independent, and in control. On the other hand, she knew that if people started to uncover the truth about her past, things could quickly spiral out of her control. Zara stood by the door, her thoughts swirling in a mix of worry and determination. The quiet evening she had expected to have was now anything but peaceful. The conversation she had overheard just moments ago had left her with more questions than answers. It was clear that someone who knew her past, was looking for her, and the more she thought about it, the more she realized how much her life had changed in the last few hours. She hadn't been able to leave her past behind, not completely. She had tried, but it was always there, hiding just beneath the surface. The skills she had honed as a soldier, the strength she had built up, were a part of her. They had kept her safe, but they also carried weight, the kind of weight that made her question whether she could ever truly move forward. But Zara wasn't one to run away from her past. She had spent too much of her life doing what she had been told, following orders, being the one people could rely on. Now it was her turn to decide how she wanted to live. Her first instinct was to shut the door on the world and stay hidden, to keep her past locked away and never let anyone discover who she really was. But that wasn't the person Zara had become. She had spent too long trying to forget her strengths, her training, the parts of her that made her powerful. It was time to accept who she was, not just the woman with the cane, but the woman who had survived, who had fought, and who had built a life despite everything she had been through. Zara took a deep breath and walked to the window, peering out through the curtains. The street outside was still and quiet, but she knew the calm wouldn't last. It was only a matter of time before someone came knocking at her door, seeking answers, looking to uncover the secrets she had spent years keeping hidden. She couldn't stop that now. What she could do, however, was decide how she would face it. There was no running from the truth. She had lived in silence for far too long, letting the world think of her as weak, as someone who couldn't defend herself. But the truth was, she was stronger than they realized. She had always been strong, even in the darkest moments of her life. She had the power to decide what came next, and she wasn't going to let fear control her any longer. The past had shaped her, yes, but it didn't define her. Zara knew she could use the skills she had learned to make a difference, not just in her own life, but in the lives of others. She could be more than just a former soldier. She could be a voice for those who needed it, someone who had fought battles on her own terms and had come out the other side stronger for it. Zara took a step back from the window and walked to the small table by the door. She reached for her phone, her fingers brushing against the smooth surface. She hesitated for a moment, but then she dialed the number she knew she would eventually have to call. The phone rang only once before the voice on the other end picked up. "Zara, is everything okay?" It was Officer Harris. She had always trusted him, even when she had tried to keep her past hidden from everyone. He had always seen her as more than just a disabled woman, more than just someone who lived quietly in the background. He had known her when she volunteered at the community center, helping others, and he had respected her even before he knew about her military past. "I need to talk to you," Zara said, her voice steady but filled with determination. "It's about what you were talking about earlier, about my past." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "I knew it," Officer Harris replied, his voice softer now. "I knew something didn't add up. But Zara, you don't have to be afraid. Whatever's in your past doesn't change who you are now." Zara smiled to herself, feeling a weight lift off her shoulders. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like she had to hide who she was. She wasn't defined by the battles she had fought or the things she had done. She was the woman who had walked away from it all, who had chosen peace, and who was finally ready to face whatever came next. "I'm not afraid anymore," Zara said, her voice firm. "It's time to stop hiding." She ended the call and sat down by the window, looking out at the street. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over everything. For the first time in a long time, Zara felt hopeful. She had faced her fears, and now she was ready to move forward, no longer running from her past, but accepting it as part of her journey. Zara knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges, and there would be moments when she would doubt herself. But she also knew that she was stronger than ever. She had survived, she had overcome, and she had learned that the greatest strength wasn't just in what she could do with her body, but in how she chose to live her life. And now she was ready to embrace the future with open arms. Zara had always been a quiet person, someone who preferred to keep to herself. But her past was far from quiet. Before the accident that changed her life, she had been someone different. She wasn't always the woman walking slowly with a cane down a quiet street. She had once been someone no one would ever have dared to pick a fight with. Years ago, Zara had been a soldier, a part of an elite special forces unit. She had joined the military when she was young, determined to prove herself in a world that often underestimated her. From the very start, Zara was known for her strength and determination. She could do anything a man could do, and often she did it better. She was trained to handle the toughest missions, and no one could match her skills in combat. She wasn't just physically strong. Zara was also brilliant at strategy. She knew how to think under pressure, how to keep calm even in the most dangerous situations. Her training took her to places most people would only hear about in stories. She had traveled across the world, doing things that few could imagine. For years, she served with honor, protecting others and serving her country. But life had a way of changing things. One day, during a mission deep in a foreign country, Zara's team was ambushed. The situation went from bad to worse, and in the chaos, Zara was injured. The injury was severe, and it left her with permanent damage. She was forced to leave the special forces, her dreams of continuing her military career shattered. Zara struggled to come to terms with her new reality. She was no longer the woman who could run for miles without getting tired, the woman who could fight off any enemy. Instead, she had to rely on a cane just to get around. It was a blow to her pride, but Zara wasn't the type of person to let this define her. She withdrew from the world, choosing to live in silence, far away from the memories of battlefields and missions. She tried to lead a peaceful life, to leave the past behind her. But her past never really left her. It lingered hidden deep inside her. Zara never spoke about the special forces, not even to the few people she trusted. She had no desire to relive those memories. Instead, she focused on rebuilding herself. She found peace in her new life, enjoying small moments like reading books, watching the sunsets, and walking in the park. Her disability made everything more difficult, but she adapted. And she liked it that way. Quiet, peaceful, simple. However, Zara's skills were still sharp. She couldn't escape the training, and the instincts that had been drilled into her for years. Even now, when she was out for a walk or going to the grocery store, she noticed things others wouldn't, small details, movements, shifts in the air. Her senses were heightened, and it was something she could never turn off. It was part of who she was, even if she didn't use it every day. Sometimes, when the world seemed too calm, Zara would find herself remembering her days as a soldier. She would remember the adrenaline, the feeling of power and purpose. But those thoughts were quickly pushed aside. She didn't want to go back to that life. She had chosen to leave it behind, to find something more peaceful. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was always lurking beneath the surface. Zara knew, deep down, that she was never truly free from her past. She had once been a killer, a soldier trained to end lives without hesitation, and although she never wanted to return to that life, she knew that she was capable of defending herself if the need ever arose. As she walked home that day, she didn't know that the need was about to arise. The gang of troublemakers she had just encountered had no idea who they were dealing with. They thought they had picked the perfect target, someone vulnerable, someone they could push around. They had no idea that Zara's past was hidden just beneath the surface, ready to surface at any moment. The gang's leader had no idea that the woman he had mocked and grabbed was not just a disabled woman. Zara was a soldier, a warrior in her own right. And before the day was over, the gang would learn exactly who they were dealing with.